atmosphere. So we are going to continue to take your questions through hashtag AskNASA on Twitter. Our next question comes from Christian. What ensures that the capsule does not melt upon re-entry? Please explain the thermal protection. Yeah, it's a great question. One of my personal favorite pieces of hardware on our Dragon capsules is the heat shield. Part of my job is to work with NASA to certify the heat shield, and so I am very lucky that I get to work.
Spacex Dragon, you're cleared to come aboard anytime.
All right.
All right.
Okay, Doug, copy, welcome aboard. We should get that in work shortly. In addition, as able, when you're ready, request your game plan for fluid loading water. This corresponds to section 3 of 4.700.
So that call out that we heard there was inviting us to turn the cameras back on inside the capsule.
Okay, I think our plan is as prescribed. And then I will be drinking water out of the other corresponding, probably all 3 of those bottles, and Bob's probably going to have to break into his corresponding bag, as well as potentially one more in volume 10.
Okay, copy, Doug. So basically, what you're saying, the bottles you expect to remove are the ones you just spoke about during breakfast, as well as one additional one from volume 10. Is that an accurate statement?
Negative. I think it's going to be one more bag full from each side.
Okay, copy. We'll probably tag up with you after fluid loading complete just to verify. Thank you.
Yeah, that sounds good, Mike. I think that's probably best because it might be somewhat variable, but I think it's pretty accurate.
Okay, copy. Thank you.
So that conversation there about fluid loading, the official space way of saying, drink your water. Making sure that Bob and Doug will remain hydrated throughout the re-entry period. If you fly on airplanes, if you do your research, it's important to stay hydrated while you're flying on airplanes due to the different pressures. Your body tends to lose a little bit more water, and so it's important to continue to drink water to stay hydrated. Same here for Bob and Doug. You heard them mention as surprise. Oh, there we can see them in their capsule. There is Doug Hurley there reading his instructions. Looks like Bob is there to your right. Looks like he's wearing a blue sweatshirt there, drinking some water. Yeah, so they're just checking to make sure, there's the back of Doug's head, just to make sure that they are drinking enough water. You heard them mention as prescribed. That means that our flight surgeon is prescribing them how much water they should be drinking, whether or not they should be taking salt tablets to help them retain that water as they are making their journey back home. So
yeah, here's that view we've talked about a couple of times, looking directly over their shoulders. And so you have those 3 main touchscreen displays, and they can configure them in a number of different modes. It looks like the one they have in the middle is giving them their trajectory. They had one on the right that was looking at a lot of the different control systems, and they get everything from current velocity, altitude. They can get deep insight into their life support system, all of the pyrotechnics on board, all of the different things of the Dragon spacecraft. Those displays are really their window into it. You'll also notice a couple of illuminated buttons underneath the touchscreens. Some of the really critical functions that require immediate action get a button dedicated to them. For example, they have buttons for a number of the pyro events on board the Dragon spacecraft, like parachute deploy, or the ability to cut those parachutes once they splash down in the water. And so they're going to get these configured, and this is going to be how they track the progress of their flight home today.
Yeah, if we get that view back between their heads, on the left-hand side of the screen, there we go. The left-hand side of your screen there is actually the control display that they'll be using for the re-entry, excuse me, for the deorbit burn. There's a bunch of information that'll be displayed there, like trajectory details, such as entry angle and capsule perigee, and how much distance is remaining between the current time and whenever that deorbit burn is terminated. So yeah, a lot of really important information there for them. They'll also be able to see which of the 4 Draco thrusters are firing at any given time during that deorbit burn. So that's we'll probably see that particular screen on both of their screens during that phase of the mission. So going back to the previous question that we had from #AskNASA, came to us from Christian. He asked, what ensures that the capsule does not melt upon re-entry? Please explain thermal protection. I was just saying that my job here as a SpaceX engineer, I have the awesome opportunity to work with our heat shield experts, both on the SpaceX side and NASA's heat shield experts, and really get the stamp of approval to use the hardware for flight. It is, you can think of it kind of like a pizza. There is the base of the heat shield, or the shape, the structure, and that's made out of carbon fiber. And that you can think of that as the crust. We then apply a coating to it that allows the individual heat shields, the individual tiles of the heat shield themselves, to stick to the structure itself. So what we use to adhere it, you can think of as the sauce, and you can think of those tiles as the pepperoni pieces on your pizza. So it's kind of a different way to explain it, but that's how I like to think of it. The heat shield, again, is responsible for really protecting the capsule. Those temperatures will get up to 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit, so pretty toasty. We will, I'm sure, have a great shot of our toasted marshmallow back on the recovery vessel once it splashes down. But yeah, so that heat shield does the bulk of the thermal protective work. There are, of course, panels on the exterior of the Dragon capsule. I mentioned toasted marshmallow. Those white panels that are on the exterior will also become brown as it re-enters the atmosphere and begins to char due to all of the heat and the plasma buildup. So really good question. Of course, with all those external temperatures getting so hot, it is important to keep Bob and Doug comfortable in their return. There will be cool nitrox purging through the cabin of the capsule itself, as well as through their suits. Anytime the telemetry, excuse me, anytime the suits detect that the internal suit temperature is getting too high, I think the threshold is 85 degrees Fahrenheit, it'll purge the suit with some cold air. So Bob and Doug will remain comfortable throughout their journey back through the Earth's atmosphere.
All right, thank you so much, Courtney. Great to hear from the administrator. And we're in it now. We're kind of in the final stretch. This is what I feel like we've been waiting for the last couple of hours, and it feels pretty great to be here.
Yeah, it certainly does. In this next phase of the mission, Dragon has a series of steps to complete before returning Bob and Doug home. As you've heard us talk a little bit so far this morning, Dragon will maneuver to the correct attitude and jettison its trunk, which is the cylindrical, unpressurized part of the assembly. We need to expose the heat shield in order to prepare the capsule for atmospheric reentry. So we will. Oh, there we got a nice view of Bob and Doug in their suits. This is the first time we've seen them in their suits and in their chairs this morning. So there they are, tapping away, preparing to initiate the deorbit sequence. So let's talk a little. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, just like in the lead up in the last couple of minutes, we heard they had good suit leak checks. As Kate described earlier, once the leak checks are complete, they don't keep the suit pressurized, so visors are open. They're going to have cool air running through their suits and the cabin and just getting ready for the ride.
Yeah. Whenever they are re-entering the atmosphere, the external temperature will reach about 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit. The internal temperature of the cabin, however, will stay around 85 degrees Fahrenheit. We have a couple of systems in place to keep it cool and comfortable for Bob and Doug as they are returning. Like Dan just said, there will be some cool air flowing through their suits. The cabin itself will also be purged with cooler air as well, so that will assist in making sure that the temperature stays pretty temperate inside the capsule.
And I mean, we're just 42 minutes and 50 seconds away from things really kicking up. And this is going to be when we really start to do that first maneuver to get ready to jettison the trunk. And then we'll do that claw and trunk separation. And then it's time for just kind of that final firing of those engines, that really just that downhill ride.
Yeah, those forward bulkhead thrusters, there are 4 of them, 4 of those Draco thrusters there at the top of the capsule near the nose cone. Those will be utilized to perform the deorbit burn. This burn is what will essentially give Dragon its final trajectory back home. This is the last burn that the capsule will perform. If you've been following along since yesterday afternoon, you know that there have been a number of burns completed. This deorbit burn will be the final one. It will last about 11.5 minutes. After that burn completes, we no longer need to utilize those Draco thrusters, and we want to protect the forward hatch up there, so we close the nose cone and lock it up. We're expecting that event to happen at 11:11 a.m. Pacific. About 10 minutes, or excuse me, 20 minutes, 25 minutes, wow, mental math on air is hard. 25 minutes after that, the capsule will be re-entering the Earth's atmosphere, and like I mentioned, approaching about 3,500 degrees, and that's because
we're in that heat of reentry, and so that's where things will really heat up for Bob and Doug on their reentry, and that's where we'll have that comms blackout. And we actually have a Twitter question that's germane to this right now, where Stephen asked, during the blackout, will you not be able to communicate with Bob and Doug, but you will be able to track them? And it's kind of a mix. We won't be able to talk to Bob and Doug. We won't be able to send or receive any data from the Dragon spacecraft. So we won't have basically telemetry-driven tracking, but we know exactly where they're going to be as their orbit's already been calculated. We've had this orbit calculated since yesterday, essentially. It's gotten fine-tuned as we've done those burns, but we'll know exactly where they're supposed to be, even though we can't communicate during that time.
Exactly. And even though we won't be able to send or receive signals or commands or telemetry, Dragon is designed to be fully autonomous. At that point, it is driving itself anyway, so there's really nothing to be worried about. Bob and Doug's primary function at that point is to monitor all of the telemetry that they see on their screens and to stay comfy.
Yeah, and once they're through that, that initial entry, we'll have that part called entry interface, which we kind of explained as that's when the capsule's really experiencing aerodynamics. They've been flying around in the vacuum of space with no air, so no lift, drag, stuff like that on their capsule. And entry interface is where they're really starting to hit the atmosphere, and it's affecting the capsule. And it'll continue to use its Draco thrusters in the service section to really guide it back home.
Yeah, exactly. So speaking of guiding it back home, here come the parachutes. At 11:44 a.m. Pacific or 18:44 Universal Time, we're going to be deploying the drogue parachutes. Drogue chutes are utilized for a couple of reasons. One, to continue to further decelerate the vehicle and also to stabilize it. Like Dan said, it will be experiencing some of those aerodynamic pressures, and so we want to make sure that the capsule is well and stable before we deploy the main parachutes. Those main chutes will be deploying at 11:45 a.m. and there will be 4 of them. Those will essentially deploy, and it takes a couple seconds for them to fully inflate, so it might look a little funny at first, but we assure you that they are working properly, and it just takes a couple seconds for the air to continue to catch in them and for them to fully expand to their large rounder shape. So after those chutes deploy, it only takes 3.5 minutes for Bob and Doug to splash down. That'll be occurring at 11:48 a.m. Pacific, 18:48 Universal. And like we've mentioned before, our splashdown location is off the western coast of Florida. We're aiming for a location near Pensacola. Our recovery vessel Go Navigator is currently in location, ready and waiting for splashdown. They're actually going to be waiting about 3 nautical miles away from that splashdown point.
Yeah, we got the call that they were on station. We also got the call that the NASA WB-57 airplane is in the air, and we've actually seen a couple of brief spurts of video. That's the airborne asset that we'll have. That WB-57 is a high-altitude research plane that NASA flies. It's outfitted with a number of imaging cameras. The main one that will be seen is an infrared one. If you watched the Demo 1 splashdown, which I'm sure you all did, you were able to see that first, and this is actually a glimpse of that WB-57 camera. We'll be getting this back, and if we acquire it the same time we did for Demo 1, we were able to see the capsule while it was still in that atmospheric reentry, so it was just this really bright light that all of a sudden lit up the sky, and that was the first view we got of Dragon. And so we'll use that to hopefully see during the entry, and then the initial parachute deploys, and then we'll have a couple more assets on the ground or on the water, on the boat, that will get a couple more views of Dragon as it delivers Bob and Doug safely to the ocean.
Yeah, so as you can hear, all of this excitement will be happening in pretty rapid succession. On your screen now, we can see closest to the camera, we have NASA astronaut Doug Hurley. He is the pilot or the commander for this particular mission, and then there now on the camera to the right is NASA astronaut Bob Behnken. We are very fondly looking forward to bringing our space dads home this morning, and it looks like we mentioned before, that'll be happening in about an hour and a half, again targeting splashdown for 11:48 a.m. Pacific, 18:48 Universal Time. But like we mentioned before, the action really begins at the claw separation milestone, which is slated for 10:51 a.m. Pacific in about 38 minutes from now. So again, we are continuing to take questions this morning through Twitter using the hashtag AskNASA. Our next question comes to us from F1 Fanatic. Do the astronauts need to have face masks down during re-entry? That is a great question. Very astute observation that those visors are in the upward position. So right now, these suits are unpressurized, and Bob and Doug are breathing just the normal cabin air. Those face masks, or visors as we refer to them, do need to be lowered and locked during the re-entry period. We need the spacesuit to be fully enclosed during the more dynamic elements of operations, and certainly the re-entry period is one of them. So we'll actually at one point during the deorbit burn preparation phase, we will actually hear communication between ground station, from ground here, Mission Control Headquarters at SpaceX to Bob and Doug, just to confirm and double check that those visors are in place where they should be. Our next question comes to us from Philip. Where exactly are the parachutes stored before deployment?
They are stored in two separate compartments on the Dragon spacecraft, on a side of the vehicle that has a deployable panel. The drogue parachutes are stored in the the upper part. It's called the upper bulkhead, and they're deployed by two drogue motors or mortars. So pyrotechnics that are fired to actually deploy those drogue parachutes. Just further down the panel, kind of at the base of the spacecraft, is where the four main parachutes are stored. And again, those get drawn out by the drogue chutes. There are redundant systems in place to make sure that if the first set of mortars don't fire, you have backups to get these chutes deployed. We're one fault tolerant on both the drogue parachutes and the main parachutes. So 1 out of 2 drogues and 3 out of 4 mains is what the vehicle's been rated and tested to. SpaceX has done a tremendous amount of testing on these parachutes, even within just the last several months in the lead up to the mission, as parachutes obviously a very critical part of the re-entry, and this is something that is very meticulously packed and documented before the start of any mission. And NASA assisting SpaceX, as we have some experts who have been involved in parachute missions for decades. But the parachutes are stored under deployable panels, and we'll see them basically fire open as the parachutes come out and deploy at the different altitudes.
Yeah, those panels are basically located above and below the side hatch panel. So if you are looking at the Dragon capsule, the anchor point for those parachutes will ensure that the side hatch will effectively be as far away from the ocean surface as possible, ensuring that we're able to expedite the process of egressing Bob and Doug from the capsule and the whole recovery process as a whole. Great question.
All right, our next one comes from Scott. He wants to know, what are the tablets on their legs used for? What kind of devices are they? I think you've heard him call out a few times that they're using iPads on board, and they're really just essentially their user manuals. They're able to dial up different procedures, checklists, things that they're looking for throughout their flight. They're able to Velcro them essentially to their suits, and just like the main displays in front of them, they're touchscreen enabled, and they have the touchscreen capable gloves in their suits. It's really just another information source. Dragon doesn't have the big paper manuals that we were used to in the shuttle era and things like that, just kind of streamlining everything as much as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Like we mentioned before, this is a demonstration mission, and so Bob and Doug's job here is to make sure that everything is working as it should be. So a lot of what they're doing is going to simply be monitoring, well, not simply, paying attention can be, especially whenever there's a lot going on dynamically around you, is staying focused can be tough. So it's not an easy job what they have coming up, but they will essentially be responsible for monitoring all the data and telemetry that is being received on screens. And part of the debriefing that will happen once they get back on land is quite simply, was there anything that happened in reality that you weren't expecting or differed from what you were instructed would occur? So making sure that in the future fully operational missions that we have, starting with Crew 1, launching later this year, that those crews are fully prepared and that we make those, essentially those instruction manuals that they do have access to as perfect as possible, because it is essential that we have correct information and that the crew is informed and aware of all the operations that are going on, regardless of whether or not they're not the ones necessarily commanding, because the vehicle is autonomous, but it is important that they do know what's going on.
All right, our next question comes from Sam. Might be the most important one of the day. Wanted to know if Bob and Doug can listen to the SpaceX webcast when they're inside the Dragon capsule. I mean, I certainly hope so. It's not like they have too much else on their mind.
Right.
No, they're not able to listen to us, but one kind of fun fact that always kind of makes us geek out a little bit is the crew members on board the space station will usually get NASA TV pumped up to them anytime their crewmates are launching or landing. So they're able to watch their friends and former crewmates as of just a few hours ago return home. So Chris, if you're watching, hi.
Great question. Another one comes to us from Ruhr Rocker. Does the Dragon capsule have windows where Bob and Doug can look out? Absolutely. Actually, one of my favorite pictures that Doug Hurley has posted on Instagram to date was actually one of the first pictures he posted at the beginning of this mission, was a shot of what he could see outside of Crew Dragon's windows. There is a window located on either side of the side hatch, and it certainly will provide visual confirmation that re-entry is happening. Like Dan mentioned before, they'll be able to see a little bit of the energy that's being expelled during the re-entry period. Some of those pieces of the ablative material, as they heat up and are designed to flicker away, they'll actually be able to see that from the windows themselves. So it'll be quite the fireworks show.
All right, our next one comes from Joe. Wants to know, does the Dragon capsule have Netflix? Another important question.
Yeah, the answer to that is no. As our views here of the capsule cycle through, we'll be able to see what their screens look like. There we go. So there in the center screen, we actually have the ground tracking map. As you can see there, actually it might be kind of hard to make out, but Dragon is actually crossing over the Atlantic Ocean, now approaching what looks like England and Ireland. So it will be crossing over into Europe soon. And also on those screens to the left and the right of that ground track screen were their telemetry screens. So those will be the interface that they use during the deorbit burn, and that's what they'll essentially use to make sure that everything is looking good and performing nominally.
Yeah, and I mean, that center screen that you just saw, that's essentially the same map that we've been looking at throughout our coverage here today. So they're looking at a lot of the same data that we're trying to give you guys down here on the ground. Just where are they over the Earth? Because it can be a little disorienting to look out the window and figure it out quickly. But they're able to see just how far along their orbit they are, where those milestones are coming up. So they can just, again, they're in a monitor mode and they're ready, locked and loaded to jump in if required. Our next question comes from Roshan, who 7-year-old Ian wants to know, why is the Dragon capsule cone-shaped? For a very specific reason, and it's why a lot of spacecraft are in the capsule shape. When they were trying to really figure out the most efficient way to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere, both from handling the trajectory without having wings like a space shuttle, starting over. When they were really first trying to figure out how to best shape a spacecraft to efficiently and effectively re-enter the Earth's atmosphere in the safest configuration, where they essentially landed on was a cone shape. Or a capsule shape. There were very initial drawings that you could find all manner of spacecraft that were put into wind tunnels, but at the end of the day, all the way back in the early days of spaceflight, when we were in the Mercury and the very early days, they were able to determine that the capsule shape was really the most efficient. That shape of heat shield dissipated the heat the best, was the easiest to control, and was really the safest option. And physics haven't changed since the 60s, at least not a great deal. So that's why you still see a lot of capsule-shaped spacecraft, and it's really just for re-entering an atmosphere. Good question.
So there on your screen, again, we have live shots coming from Dragon Endeavour as it is making its way back towards Earth. We are approaching the final steps of the day, of the mission, in fact. And at 11:48 a.m. Pacific, 18:18 a.m. or p.m., excuse me, Universal, we will have the splashdown of Dragon Endeavour. So right now, Bob and Doug are essentially cycling through, preparing for what we call deorbit burn initiation. This will be where the deorbit burn is what will be placing Dragon on its final trajectory to a specific landing location. That location there were 7 possible ones. We determined the best one for today's re-entry to be off the coast of Florida near Pensacola. The recovery vessel Go Navigator is in place, ready and waiting. And seems like Bob and Doug are pretty comfortable there. They are in their spacesuits. The leak check has been performed, and we got the call out that it was nominal, so everything good there. Right now, those visors are in the up position. They will be closed and locked whenever we get into the dynamic portion here upcoming in just a few minutes. Checking my timeline here.
We're just about 24 minutes and 20 seconds from things really picking up. That's when we'll start to get into the attitude to separate the trunk, and just about 8 minutes after that is when we'll start the deorbit burn. And again, that'll be the longest burn of Dragon's return journey. The latest timeline we got had it lasting for about 11 minutes and 22 seconds. It'll be the last firing of those forward bulkhead thrusters. The 4 Dracos at the very top of Dragon that'll eventually be covered up by the nose cone following the deorbit burn. And as we've said before, that deorbit burn is what commits them to coming home. When that happens, that capsule is re-entering the Earth's atmosphere, and that'll put them essentially on a collision course with planet Earth. It lines up their orbit to intersect with that splashdown point in the Gulf of Mexico. And while we have just a few more minutes until we get to that, we still have some questions coming in. Again, if you have one, jump over on Twitter, use the hashtag AskNASA. This one comes from Scarif Survivor, who wants to know, does Dragon lose radio data contact with satellite or ground stations during re-entry? And the answer is really everything. As that plasma builds up around the spacecraft, it essentially prevents signals being sent or transmitted or received by Dragon's antennas around the outside of the spacecraft. So it's both satellites and ground stations that it won't be able to communicate with. But again, Dragon continues flying itself. We know what its orbit is plotted out to be, so we know where it is, and we even know the expected time of that comm blackout, about 6 minutes. So it does lose contact with everything. We won't be able to hear from Bob and Doug until they're on the other side of that blackout, and then we'll reestablish communication with Dragon. All right, we have another one from Nettie Banda. Wanted to know how many seats are in Dragon.
So as you can see on your screen there are actually, I guess one is hidden, there are actually 4 chairs there available. We will be utilizing all 4 seats on the Crew 1 mission launching later this year, currently targeted for September. Right now, Bob and Doug are only occupying 2 of them, as this is a demonstration mission. So yeah, we will be utilizing all 4 of those seats in future missions, but as of right now, I believe it was on the launch portion of the mission, one of those seats was occupied by Tremor, who, if you've been following along, is the sequined dinosaur that was voted on by the 2 sons from Bob and Doug as what should be the 0G indicator. So Tremor was strapped into a seat during ascent, and when they got the okay to release him, he started floating into the capsule and you know, gave us its sequined glory there on the edge of space.
All right. Well, again, just another time hack as we're coming up on these. We're just a little over 20 minutes from the start of all of our deorbit burn sequencing starting. So we're looking at that to really pick up at about 10:48 as we'll start getting into the attitude for trunk separation. And then we start basically executing a bunch of steps that are going to commit Bob and Doug to this reentry.
Yeah, we're looking forward to those. It'll be quite the journey. Now, of course, with respect to the deorbit burn, Bob and Doug will remain in their seats and strapped in for the entire duration. In fact, they won't be exiting those seats until they're able to egress or exit the capsule after it has splashed down and been recovered out of the ocean and safely resting in the nest of the recovery vessel. Along that note, our next Twitter question is from Brett. The question is, what is the orientation of the astronauts when seated? As in, do they face the front or the top of the capsule, and do they find it comfortable? Great question there. So in the views that we just had a couple minutes ago, they were, I guess what we would call in the reclined position. They were facing towards the top of the capsule. During the launch portion, whenever they were actually getting into the capsule, back in late May, the seats were actuated in the down position where they were facing towards the hatch. The angle of difference is about 40 degrees between the two positions. They actuate in order to make sure that whenever there are G's being experienced, that it is in the most comfortable and safely ergonomic way possible. So that's where seat or actuation comes in handy. Also, it also helps them to get in and out of the capsule. It's a little trickier whenever the seats are in the up position or when they're reclined facing upward toward the top of the capsule. As for comfort level, I've heard that they have found it pretty comfortable. The seats are actually custom fitted for each astronaut destined to be flying in it. So whenever a crew member is assigned to a mission, they will also be assigned a seat specifically. So there will be no mid-flight fire drills where everyone is switching seats. Everyone has a designated seat. They're essentially small, medium, and large, and the armrests are also customizable depending on how long the crew member's forearm is. So we have taken many steps with comfort in mind, as well as style. You've seen those spacesuits. They look pretty good, in my opinion, but those spacesuits are also similarly custom fitted for each individual crew member. So with the combination of the custom fit of the suit as well as the custom fit of the seats, we have aimed to make it as comfortable as possible in the event of some sort of situation where we need to wave off an activity for up to 48 hours. That's a long time to be in a confined space, even if you are highly trained like these guys. So yeah, making sure that they are as comfortable as possible while inside the cabin was certainly high priority.
All right, our next question comes from Richard. This one deals with kind of hygiene on the space station. Just curious how the astronauts that have been on station a while, how do they stay so clean cut? I know there's not a barber on board. Do they cut their own hair? It just looks clean cut. Do they shower, do laundry? How do they do it? They do have to cut their own hair. Even the current commander, Chris Cassidy, who's still on board, famously shaved his head once as his fellow crewmate Luca Parmitano was about to arrive on space station, just so he had some bald company. But they do have trimmers on board the International Space Station that have a vacuum attached to them, so they're not just getting hair just all throughout the cabin, as like everything else, hair would just tend to float around and get caught in the drafts of the air circulation on board. So they use basically vacuum cutters in order to give themselves haircuts. So that's how they're able to do it. No professional stylists up there, but they're able to make do and stay a little less shaggy.
Quick time check here as we just passed 10:30. It's now 10:32 here in California. We are less than 20 minutes away from our first event here on our list as Bob and Doug begin to continue to check off the boxes of their return home. That first event is claw separation. That's essentially the initiation of trunk jettison. All of that means that we will need to unlatch the claw from the trunk. That is the mechanism that holds and connects the trunk to the capsule, delivers fluid, telemetry, power, all that good stuff. We need to expose the trunk in order for the capsule to deorbit. So we will jettison the trunk and then we will begin a deorbit burn a couple minutes later. That deorbit burn is slated to begin at 10:56 a.m. Pacific, 18:56 Universal Coordinated Time. So in just under 23 minutes, we're expecting that to start. Once again, if you're just joining us, we've got some live views inside the Dragon Endeavour capsule. Bob and Doug there in their seats as they are making final preparations and doing final reviews as we get ready to initiate the deorbit sequence. Closest to the camera there is NASA astronaut Doug Hurley, and further away from the camera is NASA astronaut Bob Behnken. These are two incredibly wonderful humans. We affectionately call them our space dads here at SpaceX. It's been such an honor to be able to fly them. Of course, Doug Hurley was actually the pilot of the final space shuttle mission, STS-135, back in 2011. And honestly, when I heard that he was assigned to this mission, I cried because, just to have the opportunity to return the pilot of that final mission to the space station in this capacity is so cool. And I've loved following this mission since the moment that we started training for it here in Hawthorne.
Well, we know that they're ready. They've done all of their suit checkouts, everything to get themselves to this point. And once we begin these events, they're going to keep a very close eye, as again, crew is always in the loop to step in. But Dragon going to be executing all of these different maneuvers and separation events automatically via a pre-programmed timeline. We're continuing to count down. We'll have our first maneuver in a little under 13 minutes. We're a little over 15 minutes from the claw separation. That claw connecting the service module to the Dragon capsule itself. A series of quick disconnects will retract, cutting off any of the fluid and data paths between the two. And then shortly after that, just a few seconds later, the trunk will separate. And then we will be just less than 5 minutes away from that deorbit burn. Again, deorbit burn expected to last 11 minutes and 22 seconds.
Now, of course, during re-entry, Bob and Doug will be experiencing a couple of Gs. We're anticipating them to feel about 4 Gs during re-entry. This will make it a little difficult for them to move their arms around. Not impossible, but essentially what they're doing right now is reviewing all of the event details for splashdown, making sure that and I've said this before, they have rehearsed this both they've rehearsed the sequence of events in person with the recovery team, as well as through simulations here at Mission Control, or at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California. So at this point, because it will be difficult for them to maybe flip through to the exact part of the procedure they might want to review during the actual re-entry event itself, they are reviewing those now in preparation for that splashdown, or for the re-entry sequence.
We've got another Twitter question. This one from Laura Mountain. This one's pretty cool. Is it quiet in the Dragon, or does it sound like an airplane? Well, it doesn't sound like an airplane, at least not right now, as they're still flying through the vacuum of space. There's none of that rushing air. They'll get some of that once they're further down during their descent. And then they're also able to hear when the Draco thrusters fire. And one of the really cool things they've done to train the crew is SpaceX had a number of microphones placed throughout the cabin during that Demo 1 flight last year. And they were able to record what it sounded like inside through all of the major burns, the launch, the descent and landing, everything. And in the trainer upstairs here at Hawthorne at SpaceX headquarters, they have speakers set up where, as they're doing simulations or practice runs of the different phases of the mission, they're able to hear what it should sound like inside Dragon as they're going through that. So I know that's one thing Bob pointed out, is one of the things they're looking for is, does this sound like I was expecting it to? Does this look like, is that a light I'm supposed to see? All of those different things that for them is like reflex by the time they've trained it this much. All right, well, at this moment, we are less than 10 minutes away from this sequence starting. We are just about 9 minutes away, in fact. And first we'll see that maneuver where we'll get into the proper attitude or point Dragon really in the right direction for the claw and trunk separation. We're essentially going to do a 90-degree yaw maneuver, turn Dragon sideways to make sure the trunk goes out and away, not coming out in front of or behind the capsule, essentially re-entering the atmosphere with the capsule. We're going to avoid that. And then Dragon will position itself for the deorbit burn. It's going to point those forward bulkhead thrusters into the direction that it's currently traveling. This is called a retrograde maneuver, and this is done specifically to, we're going to slow the capsule down, but more than anything, we're changing the perigee, or the lowest point of the capsule's orbit. Again, essentially putting it up on an intersection point with that spot in the Gulf where we're coming home. Eight minutes, Kate.
We are getting close. So right now we're getting our cameras on the WB-57 airplane, which is in the area, getting those cameras ready to give us our first glimpse.
And we should still have about 3 minutes left, a little less than 3 minutes, until we anticipate reacquiring our signal and our connection with Bob and Doug in the Dragon spacecraft.
If you're just tuning in, we are in a blackout period that we were expecting. This blackout period will last a total of 6 minutes, and we're about halfway through there now. At the moment, Dragon is re-entering the Earth's atmosphere, and due to the plasma building up on the exterior of the vehicle, we're unable to communicate or send commands, but Dragon is fully autonomous. It is steering itself. And right now, Bob and Doug are flying home.
Dragon SpaceX comm check.
So we're still inside that anticipated blackout window. It does look like we are getting maybe some sporadic data starting to peek through. This is why you heard that communications check with the spacecraft.
Dragon SpaceX comm check.
Denver has you loud and clear. We're about 3.9 G.
Copy, we've got you 5x5 as well, Doug. Looking good, and you can expect an automated chute deployment.
Copy. Chute deployment.
All right, really good news there. We have come out of the blackout period, and we have reestablished connection with Dragon Endeavour, with NASA astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley on board.
We were able to reacquire that communication a little bit earlier than expected, and now we are just waiting. We should just be about 2.5 minutes away from that initial drogue chute deploy.
Yeah, 2 minutes and 26 seconds.
AGPS has converged.
Copy that.
You may have heard earlier that Bob and Doug are currently experiencing 3.5 Gs. Not too bad. That's about what they pulled during the ascent phase. Just like a mild roller coaster. So the vehicle is now over the Gulf of Mexico. It is approaching the landing zone off the coast of Florida near Pensacola, and there we have our first shot.
There it is. The first view from the WB-57 airplane. It is dipping in and out a little bit. This is going to be an infrared camera showing us Dragon re-entering. We have that comm back with Bob and Doug. You heard AGPS is converging. Dragon has 3 GPS units that it uses actually in the parachute deployment process as it helps, along with the pressure sensors, really give a solid altitude to the flight computers on when these are supposed to deploy. And we're standing by for the drogue chute deployments. We should be just under 5 minutes away from splashdown.
Passing 15 kilometers, brace for drogue window.
Copy, we're braced.
Just about 14 kilometers in altitude, 8.4 miles, continuing to descend.
There on your screen, we have a shot of the capsule as it is preparing to deploy those initial parachutes, the drogue parachutes. Again, these parachutes help slow the vehicle down even further and help stabilize in preparation for main chute deployment. Right about now, the capsule is going about 400 miles per hour, decelerating quickly.
And standing by for drogue deploys.
Visual, 2 drogues out.
There on your screen, we have visual confirmation of those 2 drogue deployments.
Copy, do drogue.
All right, so 2 of 2, the drogues now out. They're going to do their slowing and stabilizing of the Dragon spacecraft. They should be detaching in just a few moments, and then we'll see 4 parachutes, the main parachutes deployed. Dragon under drogues.
Drogue descent rate nominal.
So the expected descent rate, the expected velocity under the drogues nominal, we're right at around 150 miles an hour and already dropping. You can see the drogues now detach.
And there we have confirmation of deployment of the 4 main parachutes.
We are visual on 4 chutes out.
We are visual. 4 main parachutes
Copy,
deployed.
4 main.
So at this point, the main parachutes have deployed. They are inflating, as you can see there on your screen, continuing to slow Dragon down significantly. We are anticipating splashdown in just under 2 minutes and 30 seconds.
Yeah, we've already slowed the vehicle down to about 16 miles an hour. It's already less than 1 kilometer in altitude.
Main chute descent rate nominal, passing through 700 meters.
So at this point, Dragon has saved all propulsion systems on
600
board.
meters.
600 meters.
And we're 600 meters above the Gulf of Mexico.
Should be approximately 1:30 from splashdown.
Mission control team here in Hawthorne has reported the precise landing coordinates to the recovery team. they are standing by, ready to go get our space dads.
100 meters.
We just passed about 300 meters. 1 minute till splashdown.
200 meters. We are braced for splashdown.
Copy, brace for splashdown.
So there we heard Bob and Doug reporting that they are bracing for a splashdown. We should be able to see the Gulf of Mexico here in the shot just momentarily, as we're now just about 20 meters off the ocean.
Splashdown.
As you can see on your screen, we have visual confirmation for splashdown.
SpaceX copies and concurs. We see splashdown and mains cut.
Dragon Endeavour has returned home. NASA astronauts Bob and Doug.
On behalf of the SpaceX and NASA teams, welcome back to planet Earth, and thanks for flying SpaceX.
It was truly our honor and privilege to fly in flight of the Crew Dragon and Endeavour. Congrats, everybody at SpaceX. All good, and we're into section of 4.800.
Thanks for those words, Doug, and we copy that you are into 4.800.
So great news all around there. Our space dads are back on Earth after a 19-hour return journey from space. Dragon Endeavour has splashed down in the Gulf of Mexico, just off the coast of Pensacola, Florida. And on your screen there, you can see our two fast boats, and they are indeed fast, racing out to greet Dragon Endeavour as it sits there. The first on there, we can see a view inside the capsule. Bob and Doug looking good. Although the communication was a little choppy, we did hear
Endeavour in 3.1. We show ourselves in stable 1.
And SpaceX copies for vehicle assessment, step 3.1, stable 1. Good news.
Stable 1, essentially. They're upright in the water. Stable 2, also another potential where it could be on its side or even upside down, but Dragon does have a water ballast system to keep it upright, where it's able to essentially pump seawater into bladders in the service section of the capsule. But they're upright. We already see the fast boats approaching. They touched down, came right on time at 11:48 a.m. Pacific, 1848 UTC. Bob and Doug now in the water, and the recovery ops, they've already begun. We already see the fast boats starting to move in. We're still maintaining that good communication back with Bob and Doug and the team here in Hawthorne. Pretty soon we should be getting the go for them to move in, begin their hypergol sniffs, and begin wrangling up those parachutes. But we can see Bob and Doug inside the capsule, back on planet Earth.
Yeah, those fast boats will be moving in to do a couple of things. They'll be performing what's known as a sniffer test. That's essentially to ensure that the air around the vehicle doesn't have any toxic fumes from the hypergolic propellants on board. So once we get the all clear from there, the water recovery lead will give the go for approach, and that's when the first fast boat will actually approach the capsule. Hopefully give a little wave to Bob and Doug through the window. And one of the team members will actually climb on top of Crew Dragon and begin to place the rigging equipment necessary to hoist Dragon out of the water.
Oh, still getting a view from the WB. The airplane flying overhead, it gave us those great views of really our first views of Bob and Doug re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. From up above. You can see the 4 parachutes in the water. We heard those were cut automatically as expected by Dragon. So for now, the crew just standing by. Again, they're going to stay in their suits, in their seats. We're waiting for all these initial checks.
Dragon, SpaceX, comm check.
Loud and clear, hello.
Loud and clear as well. Just wanted to verify a quick comm reconfiguration. Thank you.
So essentially what just happened there is they reconfigured.
And Solo, if you can just relay the status of the fast boats and the recovery as you get them, we would appreciate it.
You bet. Absolutely, Doug. Wilco.
So what just happened there, you heard comms reconfiguration. That's essentially looping Bob and Doug's communication into the into the recovery team, so that if not, they can hear feedback from Bob and Doug directly as well. Now, we talked a little bit about
SpaceX Endeavor. You can let Ben and James know we're doing pretty good so far.
Okay, we'll let the flight docs know that you're feeling good so far. Thanks for that update.
really good news there to hear that they're feeling good, and they can let the flight surgeons know that all is well inside Dragon Endeavor.
All right, and it sounds like we do have one of our folks that's on location there with the recovery forces, NASA's Brandy Dean. She's joining us by satellite phone. Brandy, if you can hear me, I mean, what is it like right there in the water? What was it like to watch
Dragon? We're
watch them splash down
for the test objective. So stand by at the console. Once we get it up and operating, I'll let you know.
Okay, SpaceX copies. We'll be ready for that in just a couple minutes. We should have the go for you in just a moment. Please stand by.
I can hear you, but they're good.
There in the center of your screen, Dragon capsule, awaiting for the fast boats to approach and begin the rigging process. And there on the left-hand side of your screen, we can see that second fast boat come into view.
Dragon, SpaceX, we are go for recovery personnel to approach. Expect personnel alongside in just under a minute.
Dragon copies. Thank you.
All right, so they're starting to move in. As Kate just said, that first boat's going to go in, sniff around the capsule for any traces of hypergulls. The second one's going to start rounding up the parachutes, which we're getting some really cool views from the WV-57 still flying overhead. Looking down, you can see the parachutes in the water, and the second boat start to gather them up. We'll try one more time real quick. We have NASA's Brandy Dean out with the recovery forces. Brandy, if you can hear me, what was it like to watch this Dragon come down under parachutes?
Oh, it was amazing. I wish everybody could have had my view. It was such beautiful sight. It's a gorgeous day. The water is calm. Really the best weather we could have asked for. And we heard the sonic booms as it made its way back there, and we were able to find it early on as the parachutes were deploying. So it was very exciting for everybody who was gathered here.
That's incredible. We actually had some questions from people if you'd be able to hear the sonic boom, and we weren't sure. So I'm really glad you just answered that for us. I mean, we talked so much about the weather. You said it looks great. What was it like on the ride out there? Has it just been kind of clear skies and clear seas the whole way?
I'm not sure if you can hear me right now, but I think you're asking about the weather with clear skies. There are just a kind of a circle of clouds along the horizon, very low, but we were able to see the parachute far above the clouds and follow it all the way until it splashed down.
All right, well, we're not getting any views on the boat, so what kind of activity is taking place right now? We're able to see the fast boats approaching the capsule. What's everybody doing on the boat to just kind of get everything ready?
The boat's also making its way towards the capsule. I can't see it with my mirror. But yeah, so we're getting closer. Everybody's been kind of standing by, holding ready positions for quite a while now. So as soon as it splashed down, people to just stand and start working on their own activities.
All right, copy that. Well, we're going to keep watching from here. Thanks for calling in, and thanks for being out there with everybody and getting us these great views. It's really incredible. Thanks, Brandy. Hope to get you back in port soon, and we'll talk to you back in Houston.
Thank you.
So there on your screen, camera view change. That is a view coming to us from Go Navigator, the recovery vessel. The two fast boats are out there getting ready to basically install the rigging equipment required to hoist Dragon out of the water. The other fast boat is actually collecting the parachutes from the water. We definitely want to bring those back on board with us. But shortly here, we should actually see one of the team members crawl up onto the side of the capsule in order to install the rigging, like I mentioned. That particular team member is highly experienced and highly trained. As you can imagine, climbing on top of an oddly shaped thing in the ocean could be a little tricky. So this person has undergone hours and hours of training and certification in order to perform this very important task. There on the right-hand side of your screen, we see the second fast boat approaching. Of course, both of these boats needed to wait for their cue from the water recovery lead in order to approach Dragon after splashdown. Again, that was just to make sure that there weren't any toxic vapors in the air. And now that they got the all clear, we do see them beginning to work on and around the Dragon capsule. So even though the camera's a little shaky, that water looks super, super duper smooth, almost like glass, which is certainly ideal for a water recovery like today.
Yeah, got to remember that this is a view from the main recovery vessel, which was still a few miles away from the splashdown
Dragon
point.
Spacex. We have hypergol sweeps and unfired ordnance checks nominal. Rigger is on board the vehicle. About 5 minutes until capsule lift.
After that, yep, we see them walking outside, and good news.
All right, confirmation there that all of those hypergolic vapor tests came out positive, or rather negative, which is a positive thing. So the team was able to approach, and now the crew member that is installing the rigging is on top of the capsule. It's difficult to see there because the slower vessel, the primary recovery ship, is a little further away. But as we heard, it's just a mere 2.5 minutes until they will be hoisted out of the water. I'm sorry, 25 minutes, not 2.5. I misheard that.
Yeah, they're fast, but they're not that fast. We also have been hearing that the secondary boat, which its primary mission in this case is securing those parachutes, they've already got buoys attached to both drogues and 2 of the 4 mains, and already had eyes on the other 2, so they're moving through that work pretty quickly. Again, their primary responsibility getting those parachutes together. The drogues detaching from the spacecraft right before the deployment of the mains automatically detaching immediately as Dragon detected splashdown. All of that happening right per the timeline.
Yeah, we've talked a little bit about the hardwired buttons that Bob and Doug have on their seats and in their control displays, and cutting the main chutes is one of those buttons. In the event that they weren't automatically cut after splashdown, Bob and Doug would have had the ability to do so. If the winds were stronger and they caught the parachutes, it could certainly create a condition where the capsule could be moved unintentionally by those dragging parachutes. So definitely want to avoid that. So that's one of the few buttons that are hardwired into the cabin for the crew.
And again, right now we're expecting about 20 minutes for the main recovery vessel, the Go Navigator, to reach Dragon. By that point, all the rigging will be affixed, and then they'll be able to use the A-frame hydraulic lift on the back of the vessel to begin to pull Dragon up out of the water. Bob and Doug did report they're seeing the guys climbing around outside their window on the capsule, getting that rigging affixed. Still doing good from all of their reports. And we're just going to see the vessel continue to close in. It's a little over 1.3 nautical miles still away, but you can see things starting to sharpen up in our view as it does draw in closer.
One thing I didn't get to mention as the sequence events was happening, everything was going so quickly, just before the drogue deployment, the seats automatically rotated to about 26 degrees. And so if you think back to when we saw Bob and Doug while they were still on orbit and during the deorbit burn and all their departure burns, they were actually laying closer to on their backs at the 40-degree position, where essentially they were looking up at the top of Dragon capsule, like their stomachs were facing the top nose cone there. At this point, the seats would have rotated, so they're in a little bit more of an upright position. That's done to ensure that the loads experienced from landing are, doesn't hurt them. So at this point, they are not really laying on their backs in the ocean. They are seated upright a little bit, which would allow them to have a better view of the team working to install the rigging equipment. So at this point, we're at about 22 minutes until Dragon will be lifted onto the recovery vessel. Bob and Doug are still strapped into their seats, kind of like an airplane. They say, do not unbuckle your seatbelt until the captain determines that it's safe to do so. They will remain in their seats throughout the entire recovery process, essentially until it's time to get them out. Like I said, we are expecting to lift Dragon onto the Go Navigator recovery ship in about 21 minutes. And then in 28 minutes, we will be opening that hatch and beginning crew egress, also known as exit.
And we did hear the rigging is pretty much complete, so right as they arrive there at the capsule, the main recovery vessel will be able to begin getting it up out of the water.
So now as the recovery vessel Go Navigator is getting closer to Dragon's position there off the coast of Pensacola, Florida, we're able to see the capsule in a little bit more detail. It is certainly no longer a bright shade of white. Like we said, those external temperatures were reaching up to 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit. So the thermal protection systems enable Dragon to return while keeping the internal temperature rather temperate.
And you are seeing a few more boats than expected. The team's currently working with a few private vessels in the area, making sure that they get out of there. And now we see one of the SpaceX fast boats moving in.
So we are being advised that the recovery team is radioing out to the vessels in the water near Crew Dragon to vacate the area so that we're able to extract Bob and Doug safely. Also for the safety of those folks in the area as well, not just Bob and Doug.
Yeah, this is obviously a dynamic operation. One of the first things we do is make sure there aren't essentially poisonous fumes around the capsule, so something like this just really can endanger the whole thing, endanger the crew members and endanger themselves. So the SpaceX team's moving in to try and get them away so they can safely recover the Dragon capsule and get Bob and Doug on deck and safely inside their medical quarters. So we can see them, they're getting a lot closer. We expect about 10 minutes or so until they should be in position. All the rigging has been affixed on the Dragon capsule. And once they arrive, they'll be able to use that hydraulic lift to get Dragon up and out of the water.
So the recovery vessel Go Navigator is getting closer and closer to Dragon Endeavor as it awaits its recovery, or as it awaits to be hoisted out of the Gulf of Mexico. Again, we landed just off the coast of Florida near Pensacola. Maybe next time we shouldn't announce our landing zone. Oh, there we got a shot from our WB-57 plane. It looks like that area has cleared out significantly, so that is good to see. And we're also hearing that all of the parachutes have buoys on them, so also good news as the recovery process continues for SpaceX Demo 2.
Dragon SpaceX for comm reconfig.
Go ahead, Mike.
Hey, Doug, we're about to reconfigure the forward link. We may lose that for about 1 or so minutes, and that should happen shortly.
Copy. Yeah, just give us a call back when you think you got it back.
Will do.
So as the main vessel gets closer, it's going to back up and get its hydraulic lift set up right next to the Dragon capsule, still in the water. Bob and Doug still inside, just waiting for that recovery. We should start the hoisting operations in the next 10 to 15 minutes. And then it'll be a pretty quick lift up out of the water using that hydraulic lift into the Dragon nest on the deck of the boat, or the ship rather. And then they'll move it underneath the helipad into essentially the crew recovery area, where they'll have a platform right up to the hatch. They'll be able to open up the hatch. SpaceX Medical doctor will be the first one through the door, able to do a quick check-in with Bob and Doug on their status, and then he and the other medical doctors, flight surgeons, and trained technicians will begin to help them out of the capsule.
Yeah, earlier, just after splashdown, we did hear Bob and Doug report that they were feeling good after reentry, so that was relayed to the flight surgeon, and good news to hear. Again, this is a view coming from the WB-57 plane as it is circling the area, and we can see Dragon awaiting to be pulled out of the water. Again, we are anticipating that lift to begin in just under 15 minutes. We're approaching 14 minutes here. And then in 21 minutes, we will have an open hatch.
And you can see the main recovery vessel in the top right there. That's the helipad with the big SpaceX X on top. It's now backing up towards the capsule.
Certainly not to be confused with one of our landing drone ships. There's a live view of Dragon floating in the water there in the background, along with many onlookers. Certainly from a safer distance at this point. This is a live shot coming from Go Navigator, our primary recovery vessel here. So it's Crew Dragon is also accompanied by the fast boats that are helping to bring it in closer. And there you can see a couple of the recovery team members on the deck. And also just behind them, we get our first good view of the nest. Yes, so this is essentially the nest in the background there. Dragon will be hoisted using the hydraulic lift out of the water and into that nest. That nest will then be pulled towards the camera from this view, towards those individuals on that upper deck there. And that's where the
Dragon SpaceX comm check.
Loud and clear, Solo, how us?
Loud and clear as well, and from the video, it looks like the boat is about one length away, about 5 to 10 meters, backing up to you.
Copy that. Thanks for the update.
All right, so good news there. We're getting ready to see Dragon to be lifted out of the water and into the recovery nest. As I was saying, that nest will be pulled towards the camera, towards that upper deck that we saw there, and that's where the medical stretchers will be waiting to assist them into the medical bays for evaluation after capsule egress.
It's already been 25 minutes since they splashed down. It doesn't feel like it.
That was definitely the fastest 25 minutes of the day.
the timeline we were anticipating was for the lifting operations to start within about 30 minutes, so we're pretty much right on the timeline still. That's been a pretty common thing so far today. You can see them with one of the fast boats getting it positioned to start moving out with the additional rigging to affix to the Dragon capsule, where they're going to use this A-frame to pull it up out of the water. And you can see the Dragon nest at the very bottom. It's that circular object with the A1 right on it.
So while this is the first time we are recovering a capsule with crew members on board, the recovery team has been...
And Dragon, just letting you know, we got a couple lines connected and rigging is in progress.
Copy that, SpaceX. Thank you.
All right there. So just updating the crew that they might feel some momentum as a couple of the rigging lines are attached. There we can actually, there's our first good shot of the individual who is placing that rigging equipment. Again, that's someone that's highly specialized and very well trained for these operations. As I was saying, the recovery team has rehearsed and practiced this with Bob and Doug themselves, actually, in a test capsule, practicing the egress, as well as they have practiced the recovery process many times, and actually through those practice runs, they have effectively cut the recovery period in half from the initial Demo 1 mission. So it's really nice to see that the process itself, after being rehearsed and carefully choreographed, is going super efficiently. Again, safety is the #1 priority, so making sure that only personnel involved in active recovery operations are present on the deck. You may have heard us mention before that there are about 40 people on board today, but we certainly don't want anyone in danger or to fall overboard. That guy intentionally jumped. Speaking of falling overboard.
We're ready. Thank you.
All right, so the crew was just told in the next 30 seconds, they have the lines affixed, so they're going to start lifting the capsule up out of the water. And at this point, the communication we're getting with Dragon is actually being routed through the boat itself at this point. So there we can see the lift. Dragon is out of the water.
Yeah, so
now
now
that A-frame is going to start swinging it back. And it's bound right for that nest at the bottom of your screen.
So there we're getting a better shot of all the points in which Dragon is tethered to the hydraulic lift, ensuring that it isn't swinging freely. And there we can see Dragon Endeavour being carefully set down into the recovery nest on top of Go Navigator.
Dragon SpaceX, welcome aboard the recovery vessel. Recovery personnel are completing final checks and preparing to translate you to the egress platform.
Be happy. Thank you.
So for the first time in 2 months, NASA astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley are on some sort of ground. I guess we can't call it solid ground because it is a ship. However, it is the first time that they are not in space, on a rocket, or bobbing in the ocean.
Yeah, so now that they're in the nest, they're going to start translating it forward. And Dragon's going to move into essentially the hangar section underneath that helipad and then up to that recovery platform that we saw a little bit earlier. At that point, the spacecraft technicians will work to open up the hatch. As we said previously, it's a manual process with a couple of different attachments you have to engage before the hatch itself can be opened. They'll get it opened, and then SpaceX's Neil Menon will be the first one through the hatchway to check in on Bob and Doug, get their initial health assessment, see if they're ready to move, and then we'll start assisting them out of the capsule and into that medical facility on the boat.
So at this point, the recovery team is doing final securing of the capsule in preparation to actually move the recovery nest into closer to the interior of the ship. It'll actually be in a little bit of a covered deck there. We saw that camera view earlier, looking straight out from the center of the boat. So once Dragon is secured in the nest will be translated then forward and closer to the recovery. Closer to the position in which we're able to actually open the hatch. So while Dragon is on board safely, we're not able to do that just yet.
Yeah, they're working to detach some of those lines that were used to hoist it using the A-frame, and we heard that they should be done with that in just a moment, and then we'll start that translation.
So right now we can see the recovery team releasing those securing lines that were used during the lift of the capsule from the water into the nest. So they are releasing those securing lines from the sides, making sure it is secure from the bottom.
And there we see Dragon moving forward.
Look at that. Smooth as a Tesla, I would say. It's really interesting to see those scorching marks now that we get a really nice up-close detail shot of Dragon.
Standing by for the go for side hatch open.
That rounded square there in the center of the capsule is that side hatch, and on either side are those oval windows.
Dragon SpaceX, stand by for side hatch opening and egress.
Copy, we're ready.
All right, crew got the call. We are go for hatch open. And if you look closely, immediately above the hatch, you can see the area where you can see them working in now. That's where those drogue chutes deployed from. The two circles on either side were where the mortars were. The main parachutes now hidden by the platform underneath the side hatch.
So the crew is in the process of removing the side hatch. We can see that Go Navigator is in transit. It is making its way back to the Pensacola Naval Air Station. However, Bob and Doug will get a ride from the recovery vessel via helicopter. So again, we're preparing to open the side hatch, and once that is done, the flight surgeon will pop his head in, do an initial check, see how Bob and Doug are doing.
And Dragon SpaceX, we've got a slight delay due to some potential NDO hits near the side hatch.
Copy, Mike. We're standing by.
And so they're still continuing to do kind of those sniffs, so checking for any vapors or anything. So those NDO, it's NO2, nitrogen dioxide, primarily can get detected in the air from the burning of fuel. So they're going to continue to just inspect around the capsule, make sure that it's, again, safe for the crew, safe for the recovery experts before they get this hatch open. But again, moving right along the timeline, it's since they splashed down at 11:48 a.m. Pacific. And so again, they're just pausing the operations for a moment, doing some additional air sampling around the prop system. We still have telemetry being fed from the vehicle, so flight controllers here in Hawthorne able to monitor prop tanks, propulsion tank pressures, and not seeing any issues with those at the moment. So again, just a short pause in the operations as, again, they're just sniffing around the capsule, making sure we don't have any readings that might indicate a fuel leak or anything around the vehicle. They did detect some NDO, some nitrogen dioxide, which is typically a residue that arises from the burning of fuel. So they're continuing to do just a couple of different air readings, grab samples essentially, before they proceed with the hatch opening.
And Dragon SpaceX update, we're still investigating. Looks like we'll be setting up a service section purge. We're working on a ETA for you.
Copy.
In case if you're just joining us, NASA astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley have safely returned from the International Space Station. They made an on-time splashdown in the Gulf of Mexico just off the coast of Pensacola, Florida at 11:48 a.m. Pacific, 18:48 a.m. Universal Time. And they have been pulled out of the water and hoisted onto the recovery vessel Go Navigator. And right now, the team is just completing, they did an initial check and found that there might be some remnant vapors, which we certainly don't want to be around when we have Bob and Doug coming out of the capsule. So the team is working to purge the service section in preparation for crew egress. Just a little commentary on the hatches that we've been talking about. So while Dragon's top hatch is used to connect to the International Space Station, that's the one that's located under the nose cone, which is currently hidden there at the top of the capsule. This is the side hatch is what is utilized for ingress and egress, both on the launch pad as well as coming up here on the recovery vessel. When the capsule is docked to the International Space Station, they will use the forward hatch to exit and enter the capsule. Something to note that once that side hatch is opened, it'll be the first time that Bob and Doug have gotten a breath of fresh air. The first time that they've been able to do so in 2 months since they boarded the Falcon 9 at the start of their mission back on May 30th.
Yeah, with an on-time splashdown, they returned with almost exactly 64 days in space on this mission, just a few minutes shy of that. So I know they're looking forward to it. At a minimum, in a little bit more of a stable condition now that they're on the boat and not in the water. But again, our team's just continuing to step through. They're reporting that they're seeing all of the vapor levels that they initially detected have been dropping, and that service section purge.
Dragon SpaceX, we show that levels are declining, but are continuing with purge.
Copy.
And in addition, just so you know, we are not seeing any, leak indications or anything like that. These are pretty small levels, but we still need to do the purge at this time.
Okay, copy. Yeah, you're reading our mind, Mike. We were just wondering if you saw any indications of a leak or some depressurization somewhere, but it sounds like it's just part of the deal.
Yeah, that's a good read back, Doug.
All right, so we're just continuing to get a view down right at the hatch of the capsule. They are detecting those very small traces of a couple of the hypergalls. The one we've heard specifically mentioned was NDO or NO3 nitrogen or NO2 nitrogen dioxide. They are at very low levels, obviously not at a very harmful level, as we still have people in close proximity to the capsule. They are going through with the purge. They're not seeing any indications of a leak in the service section of Dragon. That's where pretty much all of those different fuel tanks with the hypergalls are located inside the capsule. And we are just about 44 minutes post splashdown, actually still ahead of the timeline, as we weren't expecting to get the hatch open until shortly before 60 minutes, at which point we'd be bringing Bob and Doug out. So this service section...
SpaceX, another update. The service section purge should begin in a bit under 5 minutes. Right now we're showing NTO about 2x of our personnel exposure limits, and we're hoping once we start the purge it'll drop down for us.
Okay, thanks, Mike.
And I'm going to have to correct myself. So it's NTO, that's the dinitrogen tetraoxide, and that's one of the hypergallic fuels used inside Dragon for powering those Draco thrusters. So again, the SpaceX engineers detecting levels of NTO. It's dinitrogen tetraoxide. It's one of the hypergallic fuels used inside the Dragon spacecraft. Levels higher than they would like, so they're essentially doing a purge to help dissipate any vapors in and around the service section where those fuel tanks reside in the Dragon capsule. We're expecting that to take within the next 5 minutes or so. We were still expecting the crew out inside of an hour, so still on the timeline or a few minutes ahead, and we should be seeing Bob and Doug. Once we see those levels continue to drop around the capsule, we'll begin to step through the hatch opening process once again.
So right now we're getting ready to purge the service section. This is to make sure that the lingering NTO fumes that the team is detecting get flushed out, essentially. The service section is not the interior cabin where Bob and Doug are. It's actually the part of the capsule that is outside of the place where Bob and Doug are. It's external to the cabin, but it's inside the capsule itself. So you can think of it as the space between the exterior of the Dragon capsule and the interior space where Bob and Doug are. There's
I think the interior pressure vessel, essentially.
Yes, exactly. So Bob and Doug are fine. The air that they are breathing is, that nitrox mix that they've been getting throughout the entire duration of today's operations. But it'll be essentially the area below their cabin, completely sealed off from the service section. Yeah, that service section is where there's a lot of telemetry. It's where there are the prop tanks, and we're just making sure that those get aerated so that lingering fumes are swept away.
Yeah, again, they had detected higher levels than they want to see of nitrogen tetroxide. That's one of the two hypergolic fuels used in Dragon, the other one being monomethyl hydrazine. Those two fuels, essentially when thrown together, even without an ignition source, will react. That's what makes them hypergolic fuels. Much simpler, more elegant solution used in a lot of on-orbit maneuvering systems in spacecraft. So again, we're just standing by.
So as you can see on your screen, there is one crew member that has kind of what looks like a...
Dragon SpaceX, don't have a huge update for you. Just letting you know the service section purge is still in work. And we'll try to get you out of there shortly.
Copy.
So as I was saying, two individuals on your screen there, one with a face mask and what looks like a scuba tank there with some clean breathing air. There might be another crew member with the same personal protective equipment or PPE that will come on deck here. That type of equipment, there we go. That's the kind of equipment that is required in order to perform this purge. Again, the NTO is, the fumes from that are toxic. And of course, we want to keep all crew members safe as we prepare the side hatch for opening in order to let
Dragon
Bob and Doug
SpaceX,
egress.
looks like limits are dropping and getting pretty good. We're still continuing with the purge just to be extra sure.
Okay, that sounds good, Mike. Thank you.
All right, so we just heard the call. The limit's continuing to drop on that NTO, that nitrogen tetroxide. So they're just going to continue to monitor those. They're doing a purge, essentially flushing the air around the service section where the tanks for those hypergolic fuels are in Dragon. As Kate was talking about, they're not inside the pressure vessel, the section of the Dragon interior where Bob and Doug and their atmosphere exists. They're essentially outside the pressure vessel, but still inside the outer shell of the Dragon spacecraft. We are just about 52 minutes post splashdown. Again, we're just waiting for them to get good readings on the levels of any hypergol vapors still in existence around the capsule. and then they'll be able to step back in to this hatch opening. We did hear confirmation that they haven't seen any indication of leaks through the telemetry they're still receiving from the Dragon capsule. And so,
Dragon SpaceX, we're going to purge for 1 more minute.
Copy.
There we go, should be 1 more minute. And then if levels have dropped sufficiently, we'll be able to step back in to the hatch opening process.
Bob and Doug will be getting assistance from the recovery teams while exiting Dragon Endeavour. This is the same process for any returning long-duration crew members, as returning to a gravity-rich environment can, be a little jarring, wreak havoc with our vestibular system. So, which is responsible for maintaining balance and motion. Of course, as you've heard us say multiple times earlier, safety is our #1 priority with this operation. So you will see both Bob and Doug helped out of the capsule and assisted to just the few feet over to the medical quarters aboard the boat.
Yeah, if you've ever watched long-duration crews return on a Soyuz, it's pretty similar process where they're literally carried out of the capsule and immediately placed down into a waiting chair, where they usually get some initial medical checks out there in the field before they're then carried to an inflated medical tent. We don't have a tent, we have quarters, and they're a whole lot closer, so they'll just have a couple of feet to go from the capsule itself into those medical quarters. And then once they're in there, they'll get some initial checkouts from their flight surgeons who are on location on the boat with them. These are the people that have essentially been responsible for their health and well-being throughout their mission, both beforehand, all of their pre-flight data takes, offering them support in the lead up to launch, and then the entire time while on board the International Space Station. And then they're right here with the front line, with the recovery teams, ready to welcome them home. So it's been just about a minute since we heard that last call to the crew. We should be just about done with the purge. We're going to stand by, and hopefully we'll resume these hatch opening operations in just a moment.
Dragon SpaceX 4 update.
Good.
Okay, exterior, we're seeing 3 parts per million NTO and 6 parts per billion of MMH. Anil, however, is asking that you de-stow your Draggers and take a sample inside the cabin.
Yeah, which detector? What number, Mike?
Yeah, it'll be detectors 2 and 3 in location 14.
Copy.
Okay, thanks, Doug.
All right, so we just got the call out of the current readings of both the NTO, the nitrogen tetroxide, and the monomethyl hydrazine, either in the parts per million or the parts per billion. But just as an extra safety precaution, we heard Anil, so Anil Menon, the medical authority from SpaceX on the boat, asking the crew to take out some air detectors that they have inside with them just to do some quick sampling inside the cabin itself. So again, we've said it before, we'll continue to say it throughout, safety the top priority with this operation. So the teams are going to be very methodical and make sure that everything is in a good setup, a safe environment, not only for the crew themselves, but also for our recovery forces. But for now, Bob and Doug still inside of Crew Dragon. We are just 58 minutes post-landing.
SpaceX Dragon with a status.
Go ahead, Doug.
Okay, for NO2 on detector 2, it reads 0.0. And on detector 3, it also reads 0.0 for MMH.
Okay, great news. 0.0 for detectors 2 and 3 for NO2 and MMH. Thank you very much.
That's a good copy.
And so Doug Hurley reporting zeros across the board, no traces of either the NTO or the MMH.
Dragon SpaceX for a status update. Okay, so currently our exposure limits are below limits, but the purge is actually doing a pretty good job. We saw NTO go from 3 parts per million down to 1.5 over the last few minutes. So ideally, with a lot of caution, we'd go ahead and let the purge run for a little bit longer, but we want to see how you guys are doing. If you're okay with continuing with the purge versus knock it off and get you guys out of there quickly.
Yeah, we're fine hanging out, Mike. No problem here.
Okay, thanks for that, Doug. We'll keep working the purge to get us down, and thanks for that. Thanks for that.
Yeah, let's just keep everybody safe. No reason to rush.
Yeah, we concur.
Spacecraft Commander Doug Hurley reporting the crew still doing well in Dragon, so they are good to continue to hang out. The medical authority there on the boat recommending as long as the crew is okay and still doing well inside Dragon, they'll just continue with the purge, trying to get those trace readings of any hypergol vapors all the way down to 0. Because again, we're really focused on not only keeping the astronauts safe, but all of the recovery engineers and medical professionals there on the scene as well. So they're going to continue this purge, just dispelling the immediate area around the service section of the Dragon spacecraft. So this is really a series of fuel tanks outside of the pressure vessel, so where Bob and Doug are inside the Dragon spacecraft, which they did some quick readings inside the cabin and had zeros across the board. But they're just continuing to let these levels dissipate, bring it down to 0, and then we'll resume hatch operations. We're just a little over an hour now, an hour and 2 minutes post splashdown.
Yeah, good to hear Bob and Doug report that they're good hanging out, meaning they're feeling all right and they're pretty comfortable staying inside for just a couple more minutes.
Yeah, they were doing their best prior to leaving of playing up their expected seasickness. So good. It is good to hear that they're doing well still inside the Dragon capsule.
And Dragon SpaceX, we're still seeing good indications from the purge. We're looking to go about another 5 minutes and looking for 0 indications. If at any time you'd like us to speed things up, please let us know.
Oh, we're good. Just keep doing what you're doing. We can wait the 5. Easy.
All right. Thanks, Doug.
All right, so we'll settle in at least another 5 minutes while they just continue to disperse any trace remnants of those hypergol fuels around the service section of Dragon before we once again step into the hatch opening. We're gonna stay with you, stay with this until Bob and Doug are out of the capsule and into their medical quarters.
At this point, Bob and Doug are still strapped into their seats. The seats have actuated away from the position where, I guess, in the orientation in which you see the capsule now. During their during the departure phasing earlier this morning and yesterday, the orientation of the seats were such that essentially Bob and Doug would have been laying on their backs in the orientation where we see Dragon now. Currently, the seats have actuated upward slightly, so they are not completely upright, but they are reclined a little bit, nice and comfy there, but they are able to see in and out of those windows there that we see on either side of the side hatch.
And then once they're able to finish the egress process, getting Bob and Doug out of the capsule, once they're in the medical area, they'll look to start bringing in the helicopter as both Bob and Doug are going to be flown back to Pensacola via helicopter, getting them to the shore in just a matter of minutes, where a NASA plane is going to be standing by to then load them up and bring them home to Ellington Airfield at the Johnson Space Center in Houston.
And Dragon SpaceX, things are still trending well. We're expecting another reading in about 2 minutes, so at 19:56, and looking to hopefully egress you guys shortly after that.
Okay, sounds good, bud. Thank you.
In light of one of the social media questions that we were asked earlier, someone asked if Bob and Doug have Netflix available on their heads-up displays there in the capsule, and they've actually been pretty busy throughout this mission, you know, monitoring telemetry and data and checking for timing. And I would say now's about the time that they would certainly want something to watch because, you know, at this point, their only job left to do is get out of the capsule.
Has to be a feeling of just success, though, for those two. I mean, taking the first flight in a brand new spacecraft, we knew as test pilots, this is something that was kind of their bread and butter when they were in the military, and definitely something they leapt at the chance for once they became astronauts. And really a pretty flawless flight for Dragon. Obviously, we'll have all of the post-flight review coming up in the next several weeks as we continue to assess all the data that we received throughout the mission and any data still recorded locally on Dragon itself. And we'll be spending the next several weeks going through and assessing the mission and working through the certification process. And we're already targeting the first operational flight, currently pegged for no earlier than late September.
And Dragon SpaceX, we're now planning to stop the purge in 1 minute at about 19:57.
Copy. Thank you.
All right, well, with them stopping the purge in about a minute, that means that the levels have gone down to what they were looking for, and then we'll begin to step back into the hatch opening process and then be able to get Bob and Doug egressing or moving out of the Dragon capsule. They've been in there for a little more than 19 hours at this point since they departed the space station on Saturday. They had a sleep period, 8 hours of rest on the capsule on their way home. They've been up since a little bit earlier this morning, that wake coming about 4:40 a.m. Pacific, so a little more than 8 hours ago.
And Dragon, the purge is now complete. One more Drager check, and then we should proceed with hatch opening.
Okay, good news. Thanks.
That is good news indeed. So confirmation that the purge is complete and that they're just going to do one more test to make sure that all of the fumes of concern are away and that it is safe to open that side hatch and retrieve Bob and Doug. Once again, once that side hatch is open, our flight surgeon will be the first to say hello, get a quick medical checkup, although based on the reports that that the crew have been giving us along the way, it sounds like they're doing great, they're feeling good, and they're pretty comfortable there inside a Crew Dragon.
And Dragon SpaceX, we show 0.4 parts per million on NTO, 18 parts per billion of MMH. That's below limits. We are proceeding with hatch opening.
Okay, great news. Thanks, Mike.
All right, so there's the green light we've been waiting for. In fact, the green light we've been waiting for months at this point. This is our first opportunity to say hello to Bob and Doug, our favorite space dads, as they are now about to egress or exit from Dragon Crew Endeavour. Again, this is the culmination of what has been about a 19-hour journey home, all starting yesterday as they departed the International Space Station. So this hatch will be manually opened, and once doing so, Flight Surgeon Neil Menon will say hello and make sure that they're still doing all right, and then proceed to assist them with exiting the capsule.
And we see the hatch is now open. Hatch being opened at 12:59 p.m. Pacific. Hatch is open.
So right now they're going to put a piece of equipment in there that basically smooths out the edges and makes sure that it is a comfortable exit from the Dragon capsule. Just a little piece of structure there to ensure that the hatch will remain open and that any sharp edges around that side hatch are protected.
In the blue suit there, that's one of NASA's flight surgeons for the crew. That's Dr. Stephen Hart. And that hatch open coming at 12:59 p.m. Pacific. That's 19:59 Universal Time, or GMT.
So once again, the SpaceX recovery team is now assisting NASA astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley to exit the spacecraft.
Sorry, we got the hatch open just about 2 minutes ago. We paused for a little while as they were just detecting some trace amounts of some of the hypergol fuels. So we executed a series of purges. And then once those were down back in acceptable limits, we were able to then start with the egress.
So there we see a stretcher on deck. This is normal. This is part of the standard recovery procedure. And it is just simply to ensure Bob and Doug remain safe. Like we said, readjusting to gravity can be a little challenging. Dizziness can often occur, especially when you're on a boat.
SpaceX Dragon, cap.
So this stretcher will just be used to as standard procedure to make sure that the astronauts make it over to the medical tent as easily and as comfortably as possible.
Yeah, as we discussed, the reintroduction to gravity from microgravity can be a bit jarring, especially on our vestibular system, so the stuff responsible for our balance. And as they are on a ship underway, we just want to make sure we're taking every possible precaution to ensure that their arrival is safe and free from any injury now that they are home. And they're working to get a few of the items from the seats out of the way first before they begin extracting our crew members. They'll be coming out one at a time.
As we saw during the ascent portion of this mission, there is enough room inside the capsule for them to do a backflip in microgravity. However, considering there's a couple folks in there right now from the recovery team.
Check.
Got you loud and clear.
Just a quick comm check there between Dragon and Mission Control
And
here.
Solo from the PLC, I just wanted to thank you guys for bringing us home safe before I disembarked from ship Endeavor. I'm sure Doug will have some good words for you guys as well, but thank you for doing the most difficult parts and the most important parts of human space flight, getting us into orbit and bringing us home safely. Thank you again for the good ship Endeavor.
Thank you, Bob, for those awesome words. It's absolutely been an honor and a pleasure to work with you from the entire SpaceX team. It's been awesome.
Some initial words from NASA astronaut Bob Behnken. He's in the pilot seat, so you've heard him refer to himself as PLT. We're still standing by for our crew members to begin making their way out of the Crew Dragon spacecraft. And again, they're going to get some assistance just the couple of feet to the medical quarters on board the ship, where they're going to be able to get out of their suits that they've been wearing for all of the final dynamic phases of the separation events, deorbit burn, re-entry, splashing down just a little over an hour ago at 11:48 p.m. or a.m. Pacific time.
Again, the recovery team.
SpaceX Dragon from the commander.
Go for SpaceX.
There we have our first view of Doug
Mike,
Hurley.
I just would like to sort of reiterate what Bob said and add
my thanks to everybody over the last several years that's either worked in Hawthorne, McGregor, or down at Kennedy Space Center. Anybody who's touched Endeavour, you should take a moment to just cherish this day, especially given all the things that have happened this year. We certainly can't thank you enough. Our families can't thank you enough. And just proud to be a small part of this whole effort to get a company people to and from the space station. They can celebrate with each other.
You see some,
and we'll talk to you soon, hopefully in person.
Thanks so much, Doug, and you're welcome, and thank you so much for those kind words. And we all wish you a safe journey home and a happy reunion with your family soon, and we look forward to seeing you in person as well.
Some really nice words there from Bob Behnken.
Mikey.
There on your screen, we saw NASA astronaut Doug Hurley egressing or exiting from the capsule. It might have been hard to see on your screen there, but we got a thumbs up indicating that things are going well. I'm sorry, excuse me, I mixed up my positions there. Yeah, those words were from Doug, and we have Bob that just came out first.
Yeah, so Bob Behnken, the pilot, the Joint Operations Commander for this mission, out of the capsule now. So he's making his way over to the medical area, and now they're going to work to get Doug Hurley out next.
I think I saw a smile on Bob's face.
He was a thumbs up all the way. As they've been giving us some regular status updates from inside the capsule, they've been feeling really good. And so now we're just standing by for our spacecraft commander, Doug Hurley, to make his way out into the fresh air for the first time in 64 days. All right, so they're getting set up, and we should see spacecraft commander Doug Hurley making his way out of the capsule. And it looks like we've got him out. We've got him seated. And there we go, another thumbs up. We've got some applause here.
And as you can see in Mission Control, a standing ovation for a job well done all around.
Yeah, our crew members, Bob and Doug, are now safely back home on Earth, and they're going to get checked out now by the NASA medical team. They're going straight into the medical quarters on board the ship. That'll be their first stop on planet Earth, and then they're going to be making their way up into a helicopter and then heading back to dry land. So once they're complete, the team's going to prepare Dragon itself, and they're going to begin taking it back to shore. but just it's been an incredible mission. This all kicked off just 2 months ago on May 30th from Launch Pad 39A at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. We had a successful liftoff. We had to dodge around some weather. It was suspenseful, clearing up the last possible moment. They had a flawless ride to orbit, a 19-hour journey to the International Space Station, where they just spent 62 days on board, 64 total days in space. They were Expedition 63 crew members doing science experiments, spacewalks, repairs, everything on board the orbiting laboratory.
Their journey home